G'day Bomber fans, I've highlighted key forwards in the draft, I've highlighted key defenders. Today it is all about the small forwards. I'm going to go through the 10 best small forwards in the 2024 draft. Not linked to any clubs by the way, just players that Essendon could potentially take in the open market. So no Isaac Kako, no Malachi Champion. Now this is a very deep year for smalls. There's been a growing trend lately. Small forwards can really be found anywhere in the draft, early, mid, late. Even finding 10 for this video was hard because I had to leave out a few that I really like as players. So let's talk about my favourite small forwards in the upcoming draft. Make sure you check out other videos as well to see who we could target from every position really. So let's start from the top. Obviously I'm not going to be talking about Kako, we already know enough about him. I'll put out a video about Kako closer to the draft, but for most of the year people have been tossing up between who's better out of Kako and Joe Berry. So Joe Berry is he's a very different player to Kako. I see him pushing up the ground a fair bit. He's not as good in front of goals, but he'd be suited to that Hawthorn system where you see Connor McDonald and Dylan Moore in D50 at times lending a hand with their gut running and pressure around the ground. Berry is a really good hard worker. He isn't always active with ball in hand across a game, but you can definitely count on him to play in that role to almost make him defensively accountable. That's a big plus in his game that you don't really find with Kako, although Berry is less of a threat in forward 50, so really comparing them as apples and oranges. They're very different players that can almost play together in the same team. Many Essendon fans were dreaming of both being selected by the club, and I see why. You can fit them both in a forward line, and you can have them playing different roles, although I don't think we would trade up the order to get Berry, and he's going to be gone before our second pick after Kako. He's not going to slide that far. He is great though. He has midfielder capabilities as well. I don't think he's locked down to a forward role for his career, which is good. He runs well, he has good clean skills, he applies good pressure in a contest. I see him playing early next year, to be honest. He is, after Kako, by far and away the best small forward. He's very handy to have on a list. He's not as flashy and exciting as Kako, but almost underrated because of how deep that first round is, but we're not going to be getting him. Okay, so I may be cheating a little bit here because Cooper Hynes is not a pure small forward. I actually think he ends his career in the midfield. But early on, he's going to feature in a forward line. He's not really a small either. He's kind of that mid-sized power forward. He's 190 centimeters tall, but he possesses the creativity and goal sense of a mosquito fleet operator. His scoreboard impact is really prominent for someone who's played a lot of midfield minutes. He rests forward well, and he either makes himself a makeshift marking target because of his height, or uses his power and second gear resting to roam around forward 50 to make himself dangerous. He is a really dangerous player. That's the key word. Wherever he is, he's dangerous. He's hard to tackle. He's got a big frame. He's a big boy, so he's ready-made. You draft him and play him round one. Most teams would, at least. His ceiling isn't as high as Kako or Berry because a lot of what makes him great is his size this year against smaller bodies, but he has shown enough for me to not be worried about a drop-off once he enters an AFL system. I see a little bit of Jake Stringer in Hynes, the playstyle at least. He's really physical and powerful, X-Factor type player. He'd be a good replacement for Stringer if he slid down the order, but I doubt he does. Back to those proper small forwards, Jesse Dattoli. Now he's a real bolter. He wasn't in first round contention to start the year, but he is right up there now. This guy's going to be a fan favourite wherever he goes. He just seems like a real character. He was apparently very popular at Combine interviews, a very funny bloke apparently, so you'd get a bit of fun in the forward line, and maybe a little pest as well, which is never bad. As a player, he is very promising. He's super creative and really smart with his forward work. Ball on ground, he's very hard to contain. I like him around a moving footy. If it's bubbling about, you should watch out for Dattoli. He's probably trying to get stuck in somehow. He's also played midfield minutes, but I prefer him up forward as a natural. I don't think he has the size, both vertically and muscle-wise, to match it in an AFL midfield, although being proven wrong would only increase his worth. I feel like there's a little bit of Jack Ginnivan about him, or maybe Jack Higgins. This is a player that he will play based on vibe. When he's up and about, he's really hard to contain, not only on ground level, but in the air as well. He's clever, he's clean, he's a smart footballer who does need to brush up on some aspects to really hit that next level, but I trust him to do that. Ollie Hannaford is a really tough player to read this draft. I feel like he just came out of nowhere to be a first round contender. He had a pretty average champs campaign. His bottom age year wasn't great, but he really got going late this year with some good performances, which proved that he was worthy of an AFL list. Similar size to Dattoli, bit bulkier though. He's definitely a lot faster than he looks, not as fast as Dattoli I'd say, and that helped him play some midfield minutes late for Rebels in the Talent League. I watched him closely in the grand final and really liked what I saw. He's actually shown he can play all around the ground. He was a defender to start the year, but he really excelled up forward, so you get versatility around the ground, but you also get a position that he can naturally fall back into in the forward half, which is good. I think he probably isn't as skilled as Dattoli or Kako or Berry, but he's really hard at it and aggressive. He makes himself a force within games when confident. You see him really make a difference. I feel like he almost wills himself to be involved in games through work rate and heart alone. He's a really tough player to judge though, because he has had a purple patch of form, but also some really poor runs of form throughout the year as well. Definitely a potential slider, which is why I have his range so broad. Another really hard worker, we have Jasper Alger up next. I really like this guy. He's another one who pushes up the ground like Joe Berry or Dattoli. He uses his aerobic capacity to make himself a threat all around the ground. His defensive pressure is pretty good. Again, Dylan Moore-esque in that this guy, he doesn't make himself a good option because of his work inside forward 50, although he is no stranger to a goal, but this guy just works really hard around the ground and uses his strengths to his advantage really well. He's that perfect high half forward type player at times. He's great overhead. He's really fast, 4th fastest in the combine. It's a massive strength of his, 10th in the agility test as well. That's a really great thing to have in a player who isn't constricted to that stay-at-home forward role. This is kind of like a Joe Berry backup in my eyes. He's a very different player to Kako, but one that I can definitely see in the same forward line as Kako and work together with Kako. It's why I like Alger a lot as a player, and I think he could be a good pickup for us. I think because of the hype with guys like Kako and Berry and Dattoli, people forget about the other really prominent smalls, and Alger hasn't really put a foot wrong this year. He's only really a potential slide because of how deep this draft is. If we were to take 2 small forwards in this draft, I reckon it would be because of a guy like Alger sliding down the order, and it gives us fans another really fast and nippy forward to get keen for if we do take him, but in a different role to the one we're already drafting. Archer Day-Wicks is one of the most fascinating players in this draft. Not forwards, just players. He's a really hard player. I just don't know how I feel about him. He's a really hard player to read. He's impossible to get a gauge on. He's purely a confidence player. If he's feeling good and cocky, he'll tear a game apart and do things others can't. His skills are fantastic. He's the definition of X Factor. Again, Jake Stringer replacement, maybe a smaller Stringer replacement, but this is a forward you can rest as a 3rd or 4th marking target and run them through the midfield to create a spark if needed. He is that spark at his best. He is that player. He really can make a difference on his own when he's up and about. The issue is he is as inconsistent as anyone in the draft. He entered the year as a top 10 contender because of an excellent end to his year last year with Bendigo. He also played as an underager in champs for Vic Country in 2023, but he didn't really improve this year. And I mean, even week to week, you just don't know what you're going to get with him. He kicked 3 goals from 24 in round 14, followed it up with a goal from 14 touches in a bad game, which I remember watching, only to then go on and kick 3 from 24 again the week after. It's just so hard to know what you're going to get, what version you're going to get of Archer Day-Wicks. Is he going to stagnate or improve in an AFL system? I really don't know. It's definitely worth taking a risk on if he slips. This guy was a top draft contender early in the year, and now he's outside the top 50 on some rankings. It's really interesting to watch where he ends up. Could be top 30, could be rookie draft, who knows. Hamish Davis, a West Aussie power forward. He runs through the guts as well. He's 190 centimeters tall. Really hard to find a range on this guy. He could be earlier than I think. It could be later. It's mostly because there are similar players around. Davis kind of gives you the best of both worlds in that you can develop him as that big body in the midfield that we've lacked, or as that Jake Stringer type replacement up forward. But there are also players that are better individually in those roles, so it's hard to know where Davis will go. It's a bit like Cooper Hynes, I guess, but a different player. I think Davis is less power and explosiveness and more of that smart worker. He isn't as good to watch as Hynes. In fact, he's pretty janky looking, very strong and good with his hands, but he's a weird kick of the footy. It works now. I just wonder how that technique will go at the top level, though. I will say, though, he is pretty good at just putting the ball onto boot and getting it in good areas, so his kicking might not look fluent, but you can trust him in a quick scenario to snap out a floater in front of a running teammate or something. I'm not 100% convinced by Davis. I think he has to work on his foot skills, but if he does, he'll be a really good player for the future. He's very strong, very hard to match up on. Josh Dolan, he's another midfielder forward. He's maybe someone who's flown under the radar a little bit through injury. It means he probably slides past the second round, but he could be a steal if he does. He was playing really good footy at times this year. He's a bit like Jesse Dattoli. I feel like early in the year I might have confused them once or twice just because they're similar types of players with similar attributes and mentality, and they look similar. Dolan's a tough nut. He's someone who always looks to involve himself in the game, which is good. You get a hard-working forward with lots of energy. He's always buzzing around. I think if clubs are wanting that hard-working two-way running high half forward, well, early in the draft you have Berry and Dattoli, but if you want to wait a bit as well, you have Dolan, who isn't really that far off them in terms of quality. I'd obviously rather the other two on our list, but Dolan is far from a nothing pick. This could be a handy player for a club. Rhys Unwin, really fast small forward, nips around the place inside 50. He was the 3rd fastest in the 20-meter sprint at the combine, so pace, that's what you get. He was above Jasper Alger, who I spoke of before, and he's known for his pace. But Unwin has really good moving patterns with the ball that makes him more than just a fast player. His turn of speed and his hip movements make him probably one of the hardest players to tackle in the draft crop. So he's going to get the ball and dip his body in certain ways that either draws him that high free kick or gets him out of a would-be tackler's grasp. That's what I see most in him. He's really creative in finding space through his speed and agility, which is great in a small forward. The only reason he isn't higher is because he is a tad less clinical than you would want for a small forward to be. I'm not convinced by his ball skills, both by hand and feet. I think they need work. But from a pure evasive point of view, I don't think there are many in this draft better than him. And finally, Ned Bowman, South Aussie. This is a guy that you may know from one particular highlight. He took a massive specky earlier in the year to make himself known as a draft option. Great mark, great highlight. And I think that's Bowman summed up. He's definitely a highlights player. He's someone you won't give best on ground votes to, but then you'll go back and watch the highlights of a game and see him have an impact in moments. He doesn't get heaps of the pill, but he'll kick an important goal or two when he's needed. There's a bit of a ratio fantasia about his style of play. He's very creative. He hangs back a step from the ball to pounce when the time is right. He has really good goal awareness. His spatial sense inside 50 is great. His speed and acceleration is strong too. Ideally, you want to see more from him quarter to quarter, especially at this level. That is a worry of mine, but he clearly possesses great skills on him. He's probably a late or rookie option. And that is that. Those were 10 of the best small forwards in the 2024 draft. There's plenty more though. Evan Bradley, Jacob Newton, Cody Angove. There are some really good players I didn't talk about today. Keep that in mind. But let me know down below which one you'd like to see in an Essendon jumper. That's all though. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and as always, go Bombers.